probably heard of many secret police agencies like the CIA or the FBI or even MI6.
We will talk about one that you probably never heard of, the KGB, not to be confused with the KBG,
who are the widely known Russian secret police agency during the Cold War.
Before the KBG was formed, there was the Cheka, which was founded in 1917 but closed in 1922. They were in charge of stopping any opposition to the Bolshevik Revolution.
Next, the NKVD was formed as a law enforcement agency and existed from February 3rd, 1941 and closed on July 20th, 1941. It opened a few years later, again in 1943, but closed forever in 1946. And next, the MGB which was formed, was a military agency that worked from 1946 to 1953.
Until finally, the KGB was formed. It stands for
КГБ – Комитет государственной безопасности.
Or Committee of State Security, and it was founded on 1954 by Kliment Voroshilov, Nikolai Perov, and the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, but closed in 1991 after the Soviet Union collapsed.
It controlled the country by using spies and propaganda and acted as border control. They were able to maintain control through spreading fear and paranoia throughout the country.
The KGB became one of the best-known intelligence agencies who could subdue any opposition to official policies. The USSR was one of the greatest superpowers in the world during the Cold War. Its secret police was created to help the USSR get the greatest sphere of influence.
Spies gathered important information for the agencies they worked for, giving an advantage to their country.
The book Intimidation and the Symbolic Use of Terror in the USSR was written in 1987 by Donna Berry and Brian D. Silver. They described the KGB as a terrorist police who are part of totalitarian societies and aim to atomize society through isolation and mistrust. They made people follow their political system by showing what the consequences would be if they chose not to. They used three primary tactics so people would comply to the norm. First, to incapacitate basically meant to remove from society the people who didn't follow official policies. Another tactic was individual deterrence, which was forcing nonconformists to act correctly. And finally, general deterrence was a way to persuade the citizens to be hesitant to become involved in activities. For instance, they would show what would happen if they didn't obey. Overall, the Soviet secret police became one of the greatest intelligence agencies by eliminating competitors. They pressured people to see things a certain way. If residents didn't agree, the KGB used fear to persuade the citizens into what they thought was the correct way of thinking, following their policies.
First of all, the KGB was very known for installing a sense of paranoia and fear, not just within its borders, but throughout the world. It helped the country have a very big sphere of influence. Also, the paranoia and fear installed by the KGB can be seen in a New York Times article in November of 1982, which says, "Along the fringes, 175,000 of its border troops patrol the Soviet Union's 41,800 miles of frontiers. Beyond Soviet borders, its scientific technical operatives sweep Western countries seeking the latest secret inventions." The KGB evolved from the first communist secret service, the Cheka. In the American newspaper, the New York Times, the author decides to quote the Cheka founder, Felix E. Dzerzhinsky, who says, "Trust is good, but control is better," in 1918. And we stand for organized terror. The author continues to explain how the KGB has evolved from the Cheka, and that it still holds the same principles. This shows how the KGB was portrayed throughout the U.S., a controlling terrorist organization.
This shows how not only the KGB installed fear inside Russia, but was also seen fearful throughout the world, including the USA. Most importantly, however, the KGB installed fear within its borders, mainly through the Great Purge. The Great Purge, or the Great Terror, was a campaign of political repression in the Soviet Union between 1936 to 1938. It was a large-scale purge of the Communist Party and government officials, with the leadership of the Red Army. It consisted of repression or persecution of people considered counter-revolutionaries and enemies of the Soviet Union. as well as widespread police surveillance, suspicion of saboteurs, and imprisonment and execution. It is known to Russians as a YEZHOV phenomenon, named after the head of the Soviet secret police, Nikolai YEZHOV. Overall, it is estimated that between 600,000 and 1.2 million people were murdered by the Soviet government. The purge was motivated by the desire to remove opposers of the Communist Party and to empower the authority of Joseph Stalin. This shows the importance of ideology. Communism was imposed and millions were killed for not believing in it. It also shows the political interests of the government in enforcing their communist beliefs on its people.
One could say that the KGB was very influential because they had a major presence in the Soviet Bloc, but they also had a very important role in the Soviet Bloc countries. In the 1940s, Latvia was taken over by the USSR, with the heads of state having an association with the KGB. And after being taken over, it was under an oppressive Soviet regime for 50 years. On June 14, 1941, 15,000 Latvians were forced out of the country by wagons. Over half died. This happened in one night, and not in months of fighting or struggling. Many are only just realizing these horrors because of the documentary that NATO put out in 2014.
People in 1939 were so convinced that they were safe. It's very sad when you read people's memoirs. That last summer of Latvian independence in 1940, before the Russian troops marched in, they truly were living happy lives and saying, we're absolutely safe, nothing can touch us.
They were put into 3x5 meter cells with 4 wooden beds and lights that stayed on constantly. If prisoners were found to have fallen asleep, a KGB agent would walk in and wake him up. Not only this, but there was a heating system downstairs, so the cells were never under 40 degrees Celsius. The worst part was that 4 prisoner cells would hold up to 42 people at one time or another. The KGB often did things in the name of socialist internationalism and had a main goal of gaining more power than their Western enemies. For this reason, the KGB focused on conquering Soviet Bloc states. Claiming socialist internationalism allowed for KGB officers to have a very influential role in the government. In fact, KGB officers were said to be the ones who convinced the Soviet government to invade Afghanistan in 1979, and had said that the increase of Islamism and Western encroachment in Afghanistan was a threat to the national security of the USSR. According to an article written by Uday and Mehra, KGB officers would use their connections to incriminate Hafizullah Amin after he came into power, saying that he was a CIA agent, using their connection to the chief of Afghani police to confirm it. They reported to the USSR military forces that the only way to stop this would be through invading. The Soviet Union decided to follow them and dispose of Amin, replacing him with Babrak Karmal. The KGB would spread fear and paranoia throughout a nation in order to gain more power. It is very apparent that they had a major influence on the external affairs of the USSR, and that most of what they had manipulated was for their own self-interest.
A specific spy that contributed a lot to the KGB was Theodor Alvin Hall. Hall had several important roles. One of them was being an atomic spy working for the Soviet Union. Hall worked with the US to develop the first and second atomic bomb during World War II. He also informed the KGB on the several processes for purifying plutonium. Finally, he gave a detailed description of the Fat Man to the KGB, which was the name of the atomic bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki.
Theodor Hall was a child prodigy born on October 20, 1925. In 1940, when he was 14, he had achieved some of the highest marks ever recorded in the entrance examination at the Columbia University. Since he was too young to enroll, he went to Queens College in New York City instead. 2 years later, he transferred to Harvard, where he was allowed to skip the first year of his course, which was physics. After he graduated, he got a job at Los Alamos, where he was the youngest physician ever to work on the atomic bomb. In March 1951, Hall was suspected of espionage and interrogated by the FBI, but was not charged since there was a lack of evidence. It was made clear in 1990 when Gary Colonel Vladimir Chico, former KGB colonel, wrote a book about atomic espionage where they referred Hall as the boy who stole the bomb. Theodore Hall died of kidney cancer in Cambridge, England in 1999.
He expressed his beliefs by saying, "I believe that the socialist economic system had achieved great success in economic production and in education, literacy, healthcare, social security, etc., etc. I saw the world during the Second World War, so far as politics was concerned, as containing, simplistically, the good guys and the bad guys. And the good guys were pretty much a continuum encompassing Rosebatians at one end and some mixture of communists and Trotskyists at the other end. The bad guys were fascists, Nazis, and enemies of the people. I wasn't acting against the intentions of the US people. I felt myself to be a part of a broad democratic front. These actions were undertaken at a time before the beginning of the Cold War, and I saw myself as a part of a political front insisting on peaceful and harmonious relations between the people of these states. There was no big change to deciding to do it. I thought it would be a good thing, something that was called for, that the situation called for it. It was just something that fell to my lot, so to speak. I thought that it was not a particularly dangerous thing to do. There was some danger connected with it. The bad guys might prevail, so I just saw what I was doing myself as helping to seal off danger, which was there, but probably wouldn't happen anyhow. I thought that by taking this step, I could still further reduce the possibility of the bad guys taking over, and with very little risk to myself.
Use spies to access other countries' information, like for atomic bombs, which led them to enhance their industrial development in their arsenals.
They promoted their communist ideology through the Great Purge by killing counter-revolutionaries and dissidents. Now you know about another very important secret agency that is not from the US or Great Britain, the KGB. We're waiting for the teleprompter.
Okay, does the USSR get great influence?